pressure then, what we've got on this diagram, mean arterial pressure. Of course, mean pressure just means that actually in the arteries, if you were to plot the blood pressure in arteries as you got further and further away from the heart, you'd have blood pressure. You'd have the highest pressure, obviously, nearest the heart when the heart contracts. So if you had a sort of graph-type version of it, you'd have your highest pressure when the heart contracts in the arteries near the heart. It'll be high, then it'll go down between beats, and then the further away you come from the heart, you get this sort of effect, yeah. And then eventually that'll smooth out as it gets into the capillaries. So when it says mean arterial pressure, it just means somewhere in the system, in an artery, the pressure between heartbeats, because you can't identify every little bit of that. So your mean pressure might be, well, it might, the easiest bit might be to sort of take it up here somewhere. So I've no idea, is that, a mean pressure somewhere? It could equally well be sort of in the middle, taking a specified artery. If you take, the normal measurements of blood pressure are done in your brachial artery. So, that might be down here somewhere. We don't really know what they mean, but it is just because, you've got to take a value between contraction and relaxation. So what this complicated diagram is showing you is that there's an awful lot of different components to blood pressure. You've got the cardiac output bit on the left-hand side there, which we just done on the previous bit. So cardiac output obviously will have a big impact on arterial pressure. So you've got the same things going into that we've already got on the previous page. So stroke volume, heart rate, the filling and the emptying, the venous return, etc., contractility, etc. on there, because they're on the previous page. For the heart rate, you've got the nervous control, and you've got down at the bottom, there's an interesting box, that big box down there. They call them presso-receptors rather than baroreceptors. Means the same thing. Presso, pressure. All right, so presso-receptors and baroreceptors, same thing. They've got the chemoreceptors, and they've got receptors in the skin, that's cutaneous, and then higher centres, and that means parts of the brain that are associated with control. So those can all contribute in there. So the mean arterial pressure has a component that comes from the heart. Right. So let's just identify the key bits here. So the components or contributing factors. All right. So you've got the heart activity. All right. So that's see the previous section. Or sheet, or whatever. All right, so heart activity that we've just talked about, obviously the harder the heart is pumping, the higher the pressure is going to be. You've then got the bit in the middle about blood volume, total blood volume. Now, this is going to be controlled, apart from considering things like accidents or, other reasons for blood loss, if we assume in a normal person, then things like, well, capillary permeability, so it's how much water is actually getting into the tissues, because you're presumably aware, sometimes people get fluid retention in the tissues, so you get swollen ankles, for example, or puffy fingers, or a severe condition called edema where tissue fluid isn't returning back into the blood properly, so that will actually reduce the blood volume, and theoretically that will reduce the blood pressure. However, the chances are that the body will absorb extra fluid to make up for it. You've then got, contributing to that, the kidneys, because the kidneys will behave, well, their effect on the blood will be different depending on the water levels. So you've got the blood volume being a component of pressure, obviously. The more the volume, the greater the pressure. The lower the volume, the lower the pressure. And on the right hand side you've got a variety of things all sort of linked together. resistance in the blood vessels. Now, the smaller the arterioles, as they have on there, depending on the diameter of them and how flexible their walls are, that will make a big difference to the resistance in the system. The greater the resistance, the more pressure you need to be able to get the blood through. We've got the viscosity of the blood over there again. We've got the structure of the blood vessels being affected by the actual size of them, how elastic they are. So there's quite a lot of factors that are involved here. So we've got resistance. We've got, it's funny, I turn away and forget them completely, viscosity. And then vessel structure. And this is a more complex diagram, obviously, and it would be hard actually to use this, to write in a sort of logical sequence, I suppose. But at least you can see which bits contribute to what. Now, what we've got here is just the sort of physical side of it, and there are a lot of other aspects of control. And I'm not going to spend any longer trying to analyse this particular diagram. I mean, if you look around it, you can see, for example, that that peripheral resistance box, you've got an influence on that from the local environment. So things like temperature changes again, and chemical changes. So things like low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, low pH, and there's a lot of links in there. There is a really important box, however, down at the bottom in the middle of those three: hormones and drugs. Epinephrine, in other words, adrenaline, norepinephrine, noradrenaline, is a hormone stroke neurotransmitter. And then it says renin. All right, now I will mention the renin system to you because it's one of the potential targets. It's the most commonly used target for medication, you see. So the normal control of arterial pressure means that the body has to control other things, a lot of other things. But that bit down at the bottom is actually going to be the focus of what I want to talk about. So I'm going to leave the control bit at that point on there and sort of roll into the assignment guidance now, because I think we've got enough probably to actually work from. And of course you've got two options. So you can do the control of blood glucose, or you can do the control of blood pressure. I don't think either of them is any easier than the other. It will just depend on your understanding, really. So assignment guidance generally. All right, I'm not going to give as much guidance for this one as I did for the cells unit. All right, we have to gradually sort of reduce the amount of spoon feeding that you get, so that we're, able to release you into the wild to do these things on your own. But obviously the general sort of things that you need to take account of, regardless of which topic you actually choose from the two, your general points, don't forget. I mean, apart from, and I am not going to list all the stuff like your name in a header at the top, page numbers at the bottom, use 1.5 line spacing. If you don't get that by now, then, I'm not going to follow you to university to remind you. So, you've got to be doing that sort of stuff. But the general thing, I would say, make sure before you start that you've planned your content and the structure. And this, there is a reason why the study skills essay from a plan comes in at this point. And it's, so that we've had that chance to think about what's in a plan, what's the useful sort of side of a plan. So plan your structure and your content to start with. Now, I've given you guidance on the approach, and really it's about starting off with normal functioning of the system, then looking at abnormal or malfunction of the system, and then looking at medical treatments that can restore normality, because both of the examples that you've got are really important homeostatic systems. You know, blood glucose concentration needs to be controlled within narrow limits for very good reasons, you know, in terms of the body's demands and in terms of the damage it can cause. The you know, the control process is really, you know, important. Similarly with blood pressure, obviously, you know, looking at that big diagram, we know that, you know, you need to actually be able to control it within narrow ranges. So we've got those three components to it: normal function, abnormal function, and control by medical means. You know, we can't just let it go off abnormally. So to start with, you know, I would be thinking, right, well, it's a 1,500 word report. So that means 1,650 words at the most. And the first thing I would be doing would be to say so many words on this, so many words on that. If you stuck with a 1,500 words so that you knew you'd got a few extra to play with, it might be something like, you might say, introduction, well, no more than 200 words. Perhaps we'll aim for about 150 to 200 words there. And then the normal function, well, that's actually really important because that's the biology. You know, this is really what this unit's about, the human physiology part of it. So, well, we might be thinking about using, let's say, about 700. I might adjust this in a minute, but yeah, so let's say so far we've got about 900 at the most. If we've got then the abnormal function, you know, when things don't work properly, well, that might take, well, it depends how you approach it, I suppose. But we're running out of words here, so I think I might need to cut that one down. If I say 300 for that, then treatment, we might want a similar amount for that. I've definitely run out of words, so I'm going to have to go back and change this. So far then, I've got 1,300, that's my 1,500 words. So I might take that down to perhaps 500 to 600 words. It's still twice as much as the other two, so it's those two together. So we're now looking at perhaps 600, 1,200, 1,400, and a conclusion that's another perhaps 100 to 150 words is where I would be starting with that. And having done that, I would then sort of start on whichever bit I felt, you know, was most interesting, or I'd found some information on. You don't have to start on the normal function. You could start on the abnormal function. You could start on the treatment. It doesn't matter. If you've got it laid out like that, then you know roughly how many words you've got. But let's see, if I took the maximums there, so what have I got? 200, 800, 11, 14, 1550. I've still got 100 words spare that I could, you know, tag on wherever. Leave yourself a bit of leeway. But keeping yourself within word limits in sections is actually really useful, because if you think to yourself, well, I've got 1,500 words, there's a bit extra to play with if I overshoot, and you just start, and you start doing, oh, well, I'll get into the normal function, and you start writing, and you start writing, and you find yourself at 1,000 words, then what are you going to do? You know, or if you decide, well, I'll start on the treatment bit because that's interesting, and again, you find yourself on 1,000 words, then what are you going to do? And of course, remember that grading is, the quality grade is about structure, isn't it? You know, logical and fluid structure. So, you know, getting it in the right proportions, if you like. So the focus, because it's a physiology unit, I would say the focus is on the normal. But it might be that you can get away with your 500 words on that bit, and then you might think, well, I can put a bit more into some of the other bits. But I would start with a plan for your content. All right. The other general sort of things, do beware of the word count. All right. I am being more, what's the word? Strict on this. So it's 1,500 words. If you hand something in that's less than 1,500 words, you are missing stuff out that you could put in, basically. So you've got plus 10% means that you've got 1,650 maximum. All right, so don't work to 1,650 necessarily. Well, I tend to do that, but then overshoot and have to take a load out. You know, but give yourself a little bit of leeway there. Remember that you've got 3 assessment criteria here. One of them is for the content. You know, it's right about the subject, using appropriate terminology. The second of the assessment criteria is to use suitable images. Using images is good, but they've got to be appropriate. Make sure they illustrate what it is that you want to describe. All right, so appropriate images. Use a variety of them. You know, use, I don't know, graphs for statistics, flow charts to show a control mechanism, images perhaps of, I don't know, something like, well, the cells in the pancreas perhaps. You know, try and illustrate different aspects of your account with appropriate diagrams. Sometimes you'll get a diagram that's so well labelled, and of course the words on your diagrams, labels on diagrams don't count in your word count. Right, they're the only ones that don't. Okay, but yeah, sometimes you can get such a well labelled diagram that you know, it'll save you quite a few words. If you choose a table, however, the words in that will count, because that's just a way of summarising text. That's a bit different. The other thing, of course, that's really important, so that's your second assessment criterion, is about using images. The third one is referencing. So you've got to reference accurately in order just to pass this. Now, the 2 parts of this, of course, are your citations in your work. And then your list at the end. And very important, make sure that you're consistent with your style. The citations in your work, of course, this is also part of the grading. So you've got to do it just to pass, but how well you do it and how much you do it will contribute to your grading. Bit sneaky, but the citations, there are 3 places that they really should be showing up. Sometimes it's going to be in paragraphs, at the end of sentences, for example, or, you know, quoting, well, not particularly quoting perhaps, but in paragraphs. If you can't fit them in a paragraph, they should be at the end of paragraphs. If you have used several sources, if you've read, let's say, 3 different sources and you've put together your understanding from those 3 sources, you can put those 3 at the end. You don't have to be naming them every time. You can't, you know, you can't put the 3 sources after every sentence, can you? All right, so those are sort of different uses, but of course the other one is with images. Make sure that you're clear on the conventions. It's interesting that the referencing in this group is better than the other group. They've been taught, well, they've been shown how to use the referencing software that you get. Word has got it, and there are other ones that you can get where you have to type in the details, or you put a website, a URL in, and it does the referencing for you. But if you don't understand how to do it, then that can go horribly wrong. For example, I had one of the posters in that you did for study skills. One in that group did Alzheimer's disease, and it put a lot of organisations in, so like Alzheimer's organisation, NHS choices, but had put them into this software not thinking about it, and so the references were coming up as association comma, A for Alzheimer's Association, putting, association, bringing that out as a surname, or Choices, N, Mr. Choices, NHS Choices is an organisation, so it's what we'd call a corporate author. But because you're doing it yourself, you're actually thinking about what you're doing. So, yes, I've got to spend a bit longer on referencing with them, I think. The site.
I'm using multiple sources.
Yeah.
And I want to put the citation at the end. So should I choose the most relevant source?
You put the source. If you're putting citations at the end of a paragraph, then you put all the ones that you've actually taken information from significantly. If you look back somewhere, you'll have there was an example assignment on stem cells, where I tried to include different styles of referencing in it. And for the first main paragraph about what are stem cells, I used 3 sources of information. One of them was an A-level textbook, one of them was an article in New Scientist, the other one was a website. And so I read those 3, I wrote a paragraph without any citations in it, but at the end, in brackets, I put those 3 in. All right, so, just a surname, comma, year, semicolon, organisation, comma, year, semicolon. Yeah? If you have a look, if you're not sure, have a look on Moodle, because the referencing PowerPoint's on there, plus that stem cell thing may be on there. If it's not, I'll put it there. The bit in paragraphs, it's perhaps a better skill to be developing, where you're getting bits of information from one source, recognizing that in your paragraph. So, if you're getting some references in your paragraph, that is a better grade of referencing, shall we say. And then with the images, it's always taken from, name, and then put the date in brackets. The list at the end, don't forget, alphabetical order, and then follow conventions with that. But we may need to come back to referencing. I might need to put a bit of study skills time over to that. All right, so that's the general stuff for either of the assignments. Now, in terms of the actual 2 topics, I just drafted out some ideas, but probably too much guidance, to be honest. But let's have a look at them. If you took the blood pressure option, all right, your title isn't just blood pressure, it's homeostatic control of blood pressure. All right, so there's one. Your introduction for this would be something along the lines of, what is blood pressure? What do we mean by it? A good introduction always defines terms in your title. All right, so, what is blood pressure? What do we mean by it? Explain, what's systolic, diastolic, for example. It is introductory, isn't it? You see, it's not anything about the control. So systolic, diastolic. And then, what's normal? All right, so normal. And then potential risks of high or low pressure, potential risks if it without describing in any detail. So potential risks of high. There's not really very many risks associated with low, but you might, for example, have some statistics in there. So you might have stats associated with, say, coronary heart disease or stroke, if you can find any. So that's the sort of thing you do in your introduction to that. All right, that's not your plan for the introduction, but that's the sort of thing. So you're sort of you are defining terms in the title, and you are explaining the context and the relevance, the importance of the topic. Okay, You're saying it's normally controlled at this level, but if it's not controlled, you've got these risks. You then, under your normal control, we've got the, well, you've got that rather scary flow chart in the handouts there. So you'd be doing things like the cardiovascular centre. You'd mentioned that. You'd talk about the receptors that pick up changes, so that's part of the normal control. You would look at things like heart, blood vessels, blood volume as being involved. Those are on that sheet. But one of the things I would expect you to pursue, perhaps mostly, is a hormonal control system called the renin-angiotensin system. So that's perhaps where you need the most research on that. Renin is a hormone produced by the kidneys that causes the production of another hormone called angiotensin 1, which causes the production of another hormone called angiotensin 2. And then angiotensin 2 binds to blood vessels and makes them contract, makes the muscle contract. So that's got a really direct effect on blood pressure. And of course the name, angio means blood vessel, tensin means pressure. So that hormone is directly associated with increasing blood pressure. All right, so that's really a key part of it. Well, I don't know if we know what's wrong with him at the moment, but I'm hoping he'll choose to do the blood pressure option so that he's better equipped to talk to doctors and people who are trying to tell him, well, you need to take this or you need to do that. Because if you've got high blood pressure, it's all very well. It's easy to sit back and let the doctors treat you without being involved yourself. But what actually got me interested in blood pressure was when my own was high and I was put on a certain type of treatment, and I've just found it really interesting to find out how this whole system actually worked. And a lot of the medication that we're given actually works on this system. There are at least 3 of about 6 different categories of drug that work directly on that angiotensin system. So, it's quite a good thing to know. So we've got, that's the sort of thing I would expect in there anyway. If you've got the abnormal or the malfunction, again, I don't know whether it's even worth mentioning low blood pressure because it's not usually something that people suffer from. So, yeah. Oh well. You can put, if you're doing this one, then if you suffer from it, you can put it in there. So we'll say it's usually hypertension. Hypotension, the low blood pressure, sometimes associated with position, body position and that sort of thing, but it's usually hypertension. And that's the one that's got the big risks. So you'd be looking at causes for that. Usually the cause of low blood pressure, they don't really know. They'll usually say, well, you just got to be careful. Don't get up too quickly or things like that. You get dizzy. Yeah, eat more salt, help you retain water as an option. With the hypertension, there are 2 types of cause. Primary is there is something that's actually causing high blood pressure directly, but you can also have secondary hypertension, which is as a result of something else in the body. I'll give you examples actually that go with that. Primary hypertension. If you take about 90% of people with high blood pressure, it's what they call primary or essential hypertension. There's no other cause of it that's evident, but it can be lifestyle stuff, things like smoking and obesity and alcohol and lack of exercise and diet and all the usual stuff, Secondary hypertension is recognised as a symptom of other conditions. So, say for somebody with a kidney disease, then that, because of the effect on the kidney, it can then cause high blood pressure, or certain hormonal problems, so endocrine conditions, and so you've got, you know, two different types of cause with that. And then it's worth putting in the risks, you know, the effects, the potential risks, and of course the key here is heart attacks and strokes, the risk being much higher with high blood pressure. And then you've got the potential medical intervention and treatment. It's about trying to restore normality. And this always, I find, you know, it's one of those things that bugs me a little bit about travel insurance. Because I always have to get the travel insurance that takes into account existing conditions. And because I take medication for high blood pressure, my blood pressure is normal. However, they charge me more because I take medication for high blood pressure. My husband, however, went for years with high blood pressure but didn't take medication, so it cost him less. Now, on holiday, which one of us is at greater risk? It's him, because he's not being treated. You know, but I'm the one who has to pay more, even though actually the treatment is making my blood pressure normal. So you, insurance is an interesting thing. But I mean, theoretically, they're supposed to calculate risk, aren't they? And yeah, basically, if they can get more money out of you one way or another, I suppose they will. But yeah. The treatment and control of high blood pressure, well, you can mention, obviously, lifestyle changes, but that's not really what we're looking for in detail here. It's more about medication and how it works. This has to be very brief, you know, you can't go into the depths of this. But you've actually got, for blood pressure control, I reckon about, there are at least 6 different classes of medication. They will often just start with one and then add others and make combinations of them. So you have things like diuretics that increase urine production. You know, you'll hear sometimes elderly people, oh, I'm on water tablets, and that's to reduce the amount of water in the blood, and it'll reduce blood pressure. You can use what they call calcium channel blockers. I used to take those to try and stop my weird heart thing happening, but it never worked. Calcium channel blockers, calcium channels, because they think of calcium channels in the synapses, but it sort of targets heart tissue. Never had an awful lot of success with those, really. You get the beta blockers. All right, now all those 3 are not associated with that renin-angiotensin system. But the other 3 that I've got here are, we have the ACE inhibitors. They all end in pril. The ACE inhibitors, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, they stop part of that sequence. The ones that I'm on, and what sort of triggered my interest here, is angiotensin 2 receptor blockers. So you can see how this is interfering with the system that raises blood pressure. Inhibitors and blockers come into this a lot. And of course, that's all about stereospecificity, you know, the shape of the medication actually blocking the active part. And then there's a new type of drug, they're called direct renin inhibitors, so that's going right back to the start of that process. And I don't know anybody who's on those at the moment, but they interest me. But there are other drugs as well, but you know, that's 6 different classes of drug. and they sort of mix and match between them, and so it depends what works for people. And then you need a conclusion at the end, really, just to draw your main points together. If you're using sections in a report, you can put subheadings for the sections, but not for the introduction and conclusion. Right, so I've been a bit misleading because I've put them as subheadings, but you don't put a introduction heading, you don't put a conclusion heading, but you can put section headings for the other bits if that's how you decide to lay it out. The other option then, if I start a new board for that, is the blood glucose one. And you take a similar sort of approach. So for the introduction here, again, well, you'd start off, what's glucose? Why is it important to the body? And it's really because nerve cells will only use glucose for fuel. So you'd consider that. You talk about, you can introduce it just by saying, you can store glucose and release glucose as a way of controlling it. So storage, release as a way of controlling concentration. And then, what's normal concentration and potential risks. So you could have, for example, again, statistics on diabetes. All right, so, none of this is any detail. You're not describing the control system, and you're not describing what diabetes is here. This is just saying, an introduction. So if somebody reads that, they know what you're going to be talking about. Your normal control system, this is not just insulin and glucagon, all right? You've got what processes increase glucose concentration. Well, you've got things that we haven't necessarily met. Obviously, you've got absorption of digested carbohydrates, so we don't do digestion. So that's where most of it comes from. But there are two other sources. Of course, we can break down glycogen, stored glycogen. Now, the word for that is glycogenolysis. Right, glycogen, lysis. Lysis means splitting, all right, so glycogenolysis. And you can also have the liver making glucose out of anything it can get hold of, basically. And the long word for that is gluco, all right, for the glucose, neo, which means new, and genesis, obviously creating. So this means creating new glucose. And that's, the liver will do that. Even if you ate no carbohydrate whatsoever, your liver can make glucose out of proteins, fats, anything. All right? So those processes will raise blood glucose. Then what will reduce blood glucose? Well, it's really uptake by cells for respiration. There's nothing much else, unless it's filtered out by the kidneys because there's so much of it, but that doesn't really count. All right, so you've got your control processes in here then. Oh, this is sort of within this. You've got insulin as being the sort of key here. Now, this is not just a GCSE approach. You know, when the blood sugar's high, insulin's produced, that lowers the blood glucose. Oh no, not at this level. So you'd overview its production. You know, what causes it to be produced. But then, how does it work? What does it actually do? Well, the how it works bit. Well, it binds itself to insulin receptors that are responsible for opening glucose transporters. And these glucose transporters, there's a whole lot of them, but the one that you definitely need to mention is called GLUT4. All right, GLU for glucose, T for transporter, but GLUT4 is one that definitely needs a mention. You need glucagon mentioned. And then adrenaline could get a mention, but there's a whole load of other hormones as well that actually have an impact on blood glucose. But they'll only get a sort of brief mention. It's that insulin mechanism, I think, that's the important bit here. You've then got the abnormal. And here you want to make sure that you include type 1 and type 2 because they're different. All right, possible causes, effects, you know, what's actually happening if you don't get any insulin produced, and the sort of diagnostic symptoms that you'd have. It could be things like raging thirst, lots of urine production, loss of weight, and then long-term risks as well. The potential complications are really significant. Things like diabetic kidney, increased risk of heart attacks and things, so potential complications. Diabetic nephropathy is the kidney one, and diabetic neuropathy would be nerve cells, peripheral nerves getting damaged. People end up with amputations and all sorts as a result. And then control, oh hang on, treatment would be better, wouldn't it? The medical. So your medical treatments here, well, you know, again, it's about restoring normality as far as possible. They're different, of course, for the two types. Type 1 is really about replacing the insulin. So there has to be a combination of insulin and dietary control. But there's also quite a lot of potential for much more technological treatments. Things like sort of potential future is things like insulin pumps. So potential future, e.g. pumps. So look for research. The thing is, you will find such a huge amount of information on this. I don't know whether, you know, we're being unrealistic to try and get it into 1,500 words. We'll see.
One of them things I was reading about ages ago, where people have something in your body that will reset
the insulin pump. Yes, the insulin pump. They're trying to get it. They've got it, but it's, you know, if they're going to make it sort of, you actually put it inside someone, it's got to be a manageable size is the problem. They have them at the moment where they're sort of attached on a belt, and you know, they can be, you know, look, there's like a line into a blood vessel where it can deliver insulin. But it, you know, in terms of monitoring the blood glucose, has got to be part of it as well. And I have read of some being used, and they're particularly useful for children who suffer hypos at night. Because the problem is, if your blood glucose drops really low at night, you don't necessarily wake up. Or people are found in diabetic comas or hypos, sometimes. Because some people have very poorly controlled diabetes. So, yeah, the idea of the automatic control, so that sort of thing. Essentially, an artificial pancreas is what they want to produce. It shouldn't be that hard, should it, really? But I think the problem is getting it to a size that's actually workable. For type 2, there's some curious stuff here. Dietary control can actually be all that somebody needs. So you've got the diet side of it. There is the potential for actually reversing it through diet as well, theoretically. So reversal, I'll put the question mark after that. But if you have enough words, you can look up the Newcastle diet. It's something like 600 calories a day for 8 weeks. 600 calories is, what's it, a Big Mac probably. Depends how you decide to have your 600 calories, doesn't it? But 600 calories a day, that's it for 8 weeks. And what it does, it's such a dramatic, sort of, not starvation, but close to, so such a dramatic effect on the body, it takes the fat out of the liver and the pancreas, and it makes them start working properly again, and it restores the insulin sensitivity. Because type 2 is about insulin sensitivity. The body is still producing insulin, usually, although over time with type 2 that reduces. But it's the cells are not sensitive to it. But this dramatic diet, they've found that it will actually essentially cure type 2 diabetes, as long as people then, are careful with their diet. The usual approach, however, is medication. So there is you need to concentrate on that side of it here, really. The medication, there's a whole variety of different types of medication that are used for people with type 2. The most common one that I would want to see in here is one called metformin. Whoops, I've misspelled it. And that is its brand name. It's a type of drug called, and I can never remember what it's called, so just bear with me because I did print that off. Biguanide. It's a biguanide. All right, that's a group of drugs. That's the type of drug. And they decrease how much sugar the liver's making. So they stop that gluconeogenesis, and they can actually make the body more sensitive to insulin and help the muscles to take up glucose. So there's a bunch of these, and they're quite good at doing that. But they often combine them with other drugs as well. But there are, well, I've got a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah, about 10 different types of drug that can be used to control type 2. So it depends partly on the doctor, partly on the person themselves, partly on their cooperation, diet cooperation, that sort of thing as well. So you've got, there's quite a lot to put in there, all right, and others. And it's almost like replacing what the insulin does in a way. And then again, a conclusion, just drawing key points together. I think, to be honest, when writing a report like this or an essay, the hardest thing to write in the entire lot is the conclusion. Don't necessarily start with the introduction. Sometimes you need to do that after you've done a bit of writing and you've got an idea of, how to structure your introduction. But I would also always say the conclusion's the hardest bit. Without repeating what you've already done, you almost have to start it just by saying, in conclusion, or, in summary, or, finally, it can be seen that, or it's clear that this condition is largely preventable and can cause a lot of problems, Oh, sorry, I'm going off onto the going off onto the medical side of it, shouldn't be doing that. You know, that, all right, blood glucose or blood pressure has perfectly functioning normal systems, you know, under most circumstances, but if these do malfunction, then the risks are so great that there are medical ways of dealing with it. Is really, you know, what your conclusion comes out to be. Don't introduce anything new in the conclusion. You could vaguely say, you know, research is ongoing in these areas, and, you know, will hopefully produce results. But yeah, it's not a sort of preachy sort of report on, you know, how to change your lifestyle and all that sort of thing. The idea is that the bulk of it is about the control system. And then, you know, what happens if that doesn't work properly? In other words, we become ill. You know, high blood pressure and diabetes are illnesses. And then what can we do medically to actually restore the normal status? If not, we're not restoring the normal control system. We're taking over from that, and we're using medical intervention to restore normal conditions as far as possible. So that's the sort of approach to this. Hopefully that's given you a little bit more sort of idea as to how to go about it. But yeah.